Ladies and gentlemen, grab your coffee, turn down the lights, and brace yourselves. This isn't just a story. It's a roller coaster that'll have you clutching your armrests. We're heading to the backwoods of Appalachia, 1985, to a tiny town where the nights are long, and the shadows, well, they don't always stay still. This is the tale of Grandma Betty and Grandpa Joe, two tough-as-nails seniors who faced something so terrifying it'd make a grizzly bear run for cover. Buckle up, because every minute of this story is going to hit you like a freight train. Picture a creaky cabin at the edge of Pine Hollow, a town so small it barely makes the map. The forest looms close, dark and thick, the kind of place where kids dare each other to wander, but nobody lingers after sunset. The old-timers in town always whispered about the shadow of the hollow, a legend about something ancient, something hungry that stalks the woods. Most folks called it nonsense, but Grandma Betty, 73, and Grandpa Joe, 76, were about to find out the truth. Betty was a firecracker, the kind of woman who'd bake you an apple pie and chase off a coyote with her rolling pin in the same afternoon. Joe? A Korean war vet, all grit and no quit, still kept his old service rifle polished and a bayonet under his pillow. They'd lived in that cabin for 40 years, raised kids, buried friends, and laughed off the ghost stories. Until one stormy night in November, when the world turned upside down. It was past midnight, rain pounding the roof like a drum, thunder rattling the windows. Betty was knitting by the fire. Joe was cleaning his rifle, humming an old army tune. Then, thud. A knock at the door, heavy, like someone was swinging a sledgehammer. The air went cold. Betty froze, her needles clattering to the floor. Joe's hand tightened on the rifle. "Who's there?" Betty called, her voice sharp but steady. No answer. Just the howl of the wind. Thud. The door shook in its frame. Joe stood slow and deliberate and crept to the window. He peered through the curtains. Nothing. Just rain and darkness. He flung open the door, rifle raised, ready to face whatever was out there. But the porch was empty. Not a footprint in the mud. Only a faint, sour smell, like wet earth and something wrong. "Betty," Joe whispered, his face pale. "It's the shadow. I feel it in my bones." Betty scoffed. "Hogwash. Ain't no shadow scaring me out of my own home." She grabbed her iron skillet, the one she swore could knock out a mule. But before she could say another word, the lights flickered and died. Not a blown fuse. The power was gone, like something sucked it right out of the walls. The cabin plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the fireplace. Outside, the storm seemed to pause. No rain, no wind, just an eerie silence. Then they saw it. Shapes moving beyond the windows. Not deer, not wolves, but tall, twisted figures. Too big for humans, too fluid for animals. Eyes glowed in the dark, red as embers, blinking in and out like fireflies from hell. Betty's breath caught. Joe muttered a prayer under his breath, something he hadn't done since the war. They weren't about to go down without a fight. Joe barricaded the door with a heavy oak table. Betty lit an old oil lamp, casting flickering shadows. But then, a voice. Deep, grinding like rocks tumbling in a cave. "You can't hide." It came from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the floorboards. Betty gripped her skillet tighter. "Show yourself, you coward!" she shouted. The voice laughed, a sound that made their skin crawl. Then the walls groaned, like the cabin itself was in pain. A crack split the ceiling, dust raining down. Joe fired a warning shot into the air, the blast echoing. For a moment, silence. Then, crash. Something heavy landed on the roof, claws scraping like nails on a chalkboard. Joe pushed Betty behind him, aiming at the ceiling. "Stay back, Bet. I ain't letting it take us." But Betty wasn't one to hide. She grabbed a poker from the fireplace, red hot from the flames, and stood shoulder to shoulder with Joe. That's when they saw it. A claw, long and gnarled, punching through the roof like it was paper. Not an animal, not a man, but something else. Its skin like blackened bark, its eyes burning with hate. But here's the kicker, folks. As that thing tore through the roof, Betty noticed something, a glint around its neck. A locket. Her locket. The one she'd given her brother Tommy, who vanished in those woods 50 years ago, back in 35. "Tommy," she whispered, her voice breaking. The creature froze, its eyes flickering. For a split second, it wasn't a monster, it was something human. Joe didn't hesitate. He fired, the bullet grazing the creature's arm. It howled, a sound that shook the cabin, and leapt back into the night. But Betty was shaken. "Joe, that was Tommy's locket. My brother. He's still out there." Joe's face hardened. "That ain't Tommy, Bet. Not anymore." They didn't have time to argue. The windows shattered inward, glass flying like shrapnel. Shadows poured in, not one creature, but 3 circling the cabin like wolves. Joe fired again, but the bullets barely slowed them. Betty swung her poker, landing a hit that sent one screeching into the dark. But they kept coming, their voices chanting now. "Join! Us!" Betty and Joe backed into the kitchen, grabbing whatever they could. Knives, a broom, a jar of moonshine Joe kept for emergencies. Betty had an idea. "Joe, the lamp oil!" They doused the floor, the walls, anything that'd burn. If they couldn't fight these things off, they'd take the whole cabin down with them. The creatures lunged. Joe fired his last shot, dropping one. Betty threw the moonshine jar, smashing it against another, and tossed the lamp. Flames erupted, roaring through the cabin. The creatures screamed, their forms twisting in the firelight, half human, half nightmare. Betty swore she saw Tommy's face in one, pleading before it burned away. They ran, flames licking at their heels, out into the storm. The cabin collapsed behind them, a fireball lighting up the night. The remaining creatures vanished into the woods, their screams fading. Joe and Betty stood in the rain, soaked, shivering, but alive. The forest was silent again. Too silent. The ending, 1400 to 1500. The next morning, Pine Hollow's folks found Betty and Joe by the ashes of their home. They never spoke of that night, not to anyone, but Betty kept a piece of that locket, melted and warped, in her pocket till the day she died. The old-timers say the shadow of the hollow is still out there, waiting, and some nights when the wind howls just right, you can hear it whisper, "You can't hide." So folks, lock your doors tonight, because in Pine Hollow, the shadows don't just watch, they hunt.